Welcome back to another MobileSentrix tips and tricks. My name is Derek, and today we're going to go over some of the differences between the Samsung displays. In particular, I'm going to be talking about A series, because there's a lot of difference between the frames, whether or not it's a US version or international, and all in between, all the way down to some of the panels being incompatible. There's been a lot of questions regarding this. I've already done a video covering the Samsung A23 because there were a lot of questions around it and it was fairly obvious, so I wanted to point that out. But these models may not be so apparent. Well, let's get into the video. Now, a couple of the models that I'm going to be going over today are the Samsung A02, A03, A11, the A14, A20, and A50, because these are some of the models where there are the biggest differences, and even though some look compatible, they aren't. And even when it comes to the display panel itself without frame, there are some incompatibilities, so let's start talking about it. The Samsung A02s, you may have noticed that there's the international version and the North American version. And really a lot of this comes down to making sure that you are looking at the model numbers, where you're looking for that SM-02, in this case 025U for the North American version, or 025F for the international version. But one of the things that you'll notice between these is the incompatibility in the frames. They're going to be completely different. The motherboard will not fit if you try to use the wrong frame. But between these models, these display panels are compatible. So if you really had to, you could pull the frame away from the display and use it. Not practical for everyone, I know, not an easy thing to do, but the displays are cross-compatible, just not the frames. With regards to the Samsung A03, there are a variety of different screens, whether it's with frame or without frame. And amongst them, you have ones with the difference between a Type-C charge port or a regular micro USB. The US version versus international. You have the dual SIM versus the single SIM frames. And of course, one of those things to really look out for is the model number, because you're going to be looking at the A035F or the 37U or the 37M. And this is one of those more confusing ones because of how many options there are. So you really need to find out what that model number is so that you don't mix this one up, because they will not work. The frames are different, not compatible. And then when it comes to the Samsung A11, you'll notice that there is a US version and an international version, and they are not to be mixed up because the frames are different. The differences between these are extremely subtle, so you really need to make sure you're paying attention to the model number. Because again, if you try to install the motherboard in the wrong frame, it won't fit and you could potentially damage the logic board. When it comes to the Samsung A14, you have the A14 5G and the 4G. There's definitely differences there. And again, like the other models, what you really need to be looking at is that model number to make sure that you are not mixing it up. You're going to have the A14 5F, 5M, 6B within the service pack, which that service pack is compatible for the 4Gs that fall under that 5F, 5M, but it's also compatible with the 5G that says 6B, but it is not compatible with the A14 6U or 6P and 6V, 6W, which is the A14 5G screens. So pay close attention to that one as well. And the Samsung A20, it really comes down to there being two different versions of this one. You have the Samsung A20F version or the U version. And again, between these models, there is very subtle differences. So you really need to look at that last part of the model number so that you do not mix this one up. And last but not least, looking at the Samsung A50 screens, again, we're going to be looking at the difference between the international and the US versions. There is enough difference in the frame that these are not compatible. In general, play it safe when it comes to these screens. Make sure you're selecting the screen that you know is specific for the model you're working on, because even if the FPC connector, for example, on the display seems to click, the actual layout of what's being communicated on that particular version might be different from display to display, along with the frames typically being noticeably different. Hopefully this has helped and not created more confusion. Really focus on those model numbers so that you don't mix them up. Leave any comments down below. Thanks a ton for watching. I'll see you in the next video.